So most people would agree that the United States government was involved in the murder of JFK and RFK, but they couldn't tell you the details. This is by design. The machine has done its best to bury it. Why was JFK and RFK murdered? Who had motive? What were the discrepancies between the official narrative and the facts? And what are the lies that have been fed to the American people? In this video, I'm going to lay out JFK's actions in a step-by-step timeline that led to his murder and the murder of his brother Robert. We'll discuss his battle against Israel's illegal nuclear program, attempts to dismantle the CIA's power and control over the country, legislation to remove power from the Federal Reserve's central banking monopoly and deliver it back to the Treasury Department. You deserve the truth. After watching this video, you will never look at the American government the same. We must start at Eisenhower's presidency from January of 1953 to January 1961. In 1960, Eisenhower approved a covert CIA plan codenamed Operation Zapata to train and equip Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba. But they had to hide American involvement so it would look like an organic uprising in Cuba for regime change. Now, Eisenhower allocated $13 million for the project under the condition it remained top secret and that any American involvement have plausible deniability. Training bases were established in Guatemala and Nicaragua, and the operation was placed under CIA command with no further oversight from the executive branch. Now, JFK takes office on January 20th, 1961. He's the first Catholic American president. Operation Zapata is already in advanced planning stages, with JFK never being briefed on the full scope of the operation, as the CIA had already received the green light from President Eisenhower before he left office. Now, Kennedy is briefed by CIA Director Allen Dulles on Operation Zapata as a standard maneuvering against communism, but operational details, the scope of the invasion, the risk of failure, and risk of global war are withheld from JFK. Now, JFK did not know of the pre-approved full-scale invasion, airstrikes, logistics, and that the operation was entirely dependent on U.S. intervention for success. Now, Operation Zapata led to the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba on April 15, 1961. Now, 8 CIA B-26 bombers painted to resemble Cuban aircraft for plausible deniability attacked Cuban airfields in Havana, Santiago, and San Antonio de los Banos. The objective was to cripple the Cuban Air Force before the amphibious invasion the next day. Now, the airstrike was ineffective as most of Castro's Air Force remained intact. Now, upon return from the strikes, one of the bombers landed at Miami International Airport to simulate a Cuban defector to try and finish the cover story. However, the press and the government officials saw through the ruse, and the world knew America was directly involved in the bombing of Cuba. Now, despite emerging reports, the United Nations, the U.S. ambassador, still denied all American connections to the attacks. Now, as the story became clear of American involvement, JFK felt personally betrayed and manipulated by the CIA for misleading him and the ambassador. Now, the next day, on April 16th, Kennedy denies air support for the second planned airstrike. He fears further escalation after the loss of American deniability. Everybody knows that they're in it now. On April 17th, 1961, the ground invasion of the Bay of Pigs begins and fails due to air superiority from the Cuban Air Force. Now, privately, JFK and RFK blame the CIA director, Allen Dulles, for misleading them on their true intentions and the scope of the operation. And on April 20th, JFK addresses the nation on TV and takes full responsibility for the failure and the overreach of the operation. He immediately initiated plans to purge those responsible and restructure the CIA to be under direct congressional oversight. Now, JFK told his advisor, Richard Goodwin, "I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds." 1 month later, Kennedy forces the resignation of CIA Director Alan Dulles, Deputy Director Charles Cabell, and CIA Covert Ops Chief Richard Bissell. And he began to tighten control over their paramilitary and covert operations. Now, in June of 1961, JFK signs the National Security Action Memorandum 55, 56, and 57. The objectives were to make the Joint Chiefs of Staff and DoD, not the CIA, the primary source of military advice and responsibility for covert operations. Order the State Department, Defense Department, CIA, and other agencies to coordinate on covert action and warfare capabilities to ensure accountability and that everybody knew what was going on. And 57 aimed to assign large-scale paramilitary operations to the DoD, not the CIA, and require all covert and paramilitary operations to have direct oversight and approval from the DoD and executive branch. So, that was a lot. What does that all mean? Under the CIA, due to secrecy, black budgets, and the structuring of the agency, the executive branch is left almost completely in the dark as to what the CIA is doing. Without legislative intervention, the CIA is an unleashed agency that does not have direct oversight from Congress or the president. These orders from JFK aim to reel back and dismantle the CIA's power and have the president and the Department of Defense regain control of the country from what it saw as a rogue organization. Now, in June of 1962, JFK's brother RFK is the Attorney General, and he's assigned to investigate the CIA's black budget for covert operations. Now, this includes the CIA's narcotic trafficking, offshore banking, arms smuggling, and the use of U.S. corporations and mafia organizations for illegal operations and funding. Now, at this point, JFK and the CIA are in a head-to-head battle that no commander-in-chief before or since has ever attempted. The next party involved in this timeline is Israel. Since 1958, Israel had secretly been building a nuclear reactor at their Dimona facility to start their nuclear weapons program. Israel used Mossad spies to steal American nuclear weapons blueprints, design data, and enrich uranium, which is needed for nuclear bombs. Israel carried out this theft on U.S. soil in covert operations during the 50s and 60s. Israel's theft of nuclear weapons from America has been confirmed by declassified U.S. and Israeli sources. Now, this directly led to Israel developing nuclear weapons in the late 60s, and to this day, they deny their existence. Now, JFK knew early in 1961 that Israel was secretly developing nuclear weapons at the Dimona reactor, and he firmly opposed nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. He believed a nuclear Israel would destabilize the Middle East and trigger an arms race. And if we just take a quick look at geopolitics, he was right. In 1963, JFK sends multiple letters demanding inspections of the nuclear facility and threatens to end all American support to the country to then Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, who was also the political leader of a Jewish terrorist organization who carried out terrorist attacks, killing Arab and British citizens in Palestine, and was a founder of the Zionist ideology prior to the establishment of Israel. So what does he do? David ignores these requests and strings JFK along. Now, David unexpectedly resigns, and a new prime minister is brought in, Levi Eshkol. This change of the guard is used to delay answering JFK, and work at Dimona is accelerated during this time. Now, Levi would not cooperate, and he refused biannual inspections. Israeli officials gave stage tours initially to inspectors, but they built fake walls, fake equipment, and restricted access to certain areas to hide their true work. Now, this is important. On September 26, 1963, he demands 2 annual visits of the Dimona reactor and full unrestricted access to all Dimona facilities and a commitment to peaceful only use of nuclear technology. Refusal of these demands would end all U.S. foreign aid to Israel and end the relationship between the two nations. JFK would be assassinated 8 weeks later. After JFK's assassination, LBJ and every future president would ignore Israel's nuclear program and never challenge them for transparency again. Israel developed nuclear weapons by the late 1960s, and they never signed a non-proliferation treaty. The only countries who have nuclear weapons and refuse to sign a treaty are Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. So we have John F. Kennedy trying to rein in the CIA's growing power and autonomy on covert operations and war, while also taking on Israel's secret nuclear program they stole from America with the threat of ending all U.S. aid to the country. Then, in October of 1963, JFK signs NSAM 263, which ordered the withdrawal of 1,000 troops from Vietnam by the end of 1963, with a full withdrawal from Vietnam planned by 1965. Now, this was in direct contradiction of the Pentagon and CIA's plan to escalate the war at the time. But this showed JFK's commitment to ending American involvement in Vietnam. Now, in November of 1963, less than 3 weeks from his assassination, he signs Executive Order 11110. This allowed the U.S. Treasury to issue $4.3 billion in U.S. notes backed by silver held in the U.S. reserves. This bypassed the Federal Reserve System and acted as a direct threat to the monopoly of private central banks. This could be a video in itself, but simply the Fed issues $1 to the U.S. government on loan with interest, which creates perpetual national debt, while Kennedy's approach to restoring constitutional control over the monetary supply tied currency directly to real value-based silver, instead of the interest-bearing fiat currency created by the Fed that can be inflated and devalued. Now, after his assassination, this was never acted upon, and the Federal Reserve fully asserted its control over American monetary policy. So we have our players in the assassination of JFK, and sufficient motive for a regime change: Israel, CIA, the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, and the worldwide central banking interest. As we move into the timeline of JFK's assassination, there are too many abnormalities to be coincidence, and the obvious manipulation of evidence and silencing and death of witnesses point to an obvious cover-up. Now, November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy is assassinated. The cornerstone of the cover-up failure is the full ZAPRUDER film that was eventually released after being suppressed for 12 years. This records the moments leading up to the assassination, and during which clearly showed JFK being first shot in the neck, then sustaining gunshot wounds to the front of the head. This contradicts the lone shooter cover of Oswald from behind, but per the government, don't believe your own eyes. Now, I'll list the link to the ZAPRUDER film and the details below this video on YouTube, and it can be found at the National Archives website. JFK's exact parade route in Dallas was published weeks before the event in multiple newspapers. This is an obvious failure of security, and it allows an extra layer of deniability should any real gunman be caught. Now, the car JFK used was a custom 1961 Lincoln Continental. This could be fitted with a bullet-resistant plexiglass bubble top for security. And this top was used in Tampa, Florida just 4 days prior due to security concerns. JFK was not popular in Dallas, Texas. And this was also where Lyndon B. Johnson's entire political machine existed, where he had deep ties to powerful organizations. Now, LBJ had a personal dislike for the entire Kennedy family. Despite the hostile environment, in Dallas, Secret Service removed the bubble top before the parade started. So now, the official narrative from the Warren Commission, who were formed to investigate the assassination and was led by the fired CIA director, Alan Dulles, who was appointed by LBJ. Now, they said Oswald fired from behind JFK, missed his first shot, then hit JFK in the upper back from behind, then fired a final headshot. All of these claim to come from directly behind JFK. However, in the ZAPRUDER film, we see JFK clearly grab his throat after the first shot is fired. Blood would have been coming from this wound, and Agent Roy Kellerman turn to look back after the first round is fired but gives no command to the driver. Then the driver, Agent William Greer, looks back twice to a struggling JFK, and instead of responding with immediate protective maneuvers as trained and speeding away, he slows down to below 5 miles per hour as if waiting for a final headshot. Now, Agent Greer's slowing down in a kill zone after gunfire and visually confirming the president is in distress contradicts all Secret Service doctrine of immediately getting off the X. In fact, Agent Clint Hill, who ran behind the limousine and can be seen in the film, went on record to say the driver had pulled the car almost to a stop and did not understand why he hadn't left the scene. Now, Greer was close with Secret Service leadership and FBI Director Hoover and was known to be the longtime driver of JFK. If there were an inner circle of the conspiracy, either Greer would have been expected to comply and slow down at the intended kill zone, or he intentionally broke long-standing Secret Service protocol. Now, after the assassination, Agent Greer refused to speak publicly, and he was shielded from press interviews by the agency and died without ever giving an open account or public questioning. Now, Oswald was arrested shortly after the assassination took place in the book depository, and upon his arrest claimed, "I'm just a patsy." Oswald had extensive ties to CIA and Cuba-related agents leading up to these events. The alleged murder weapon recovered was a 6.5 millimeter bolt-action rifle, requiring roughly 2.3 seconds per shot. On tape and in the investigation, all 3 rounds were fired with positive impact in under 6 seconds. In follow-up investigations, no expert marksman in the FBI or the Army could replicate the shot sequence with positive impacts under the same conditions. Also, over 50 witnesses at Dealey Plaza reported to officials they heard multiple shots from the front of the motorcade close to the grassy knoll, including Gene Hill, S.M. Holland, and Lee Bowers, giving statements that they observed movement, muzzle flashes, and gunfire coming from the grassy knoll area ahead of JFK. Now, JFK was taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas within minutes of the shooting. He was treated by multiple attending trauma surgeons. Their on-record observations noted an entrance wound consistent with a GSW to the front of the throat and a massive exit wound in the rear right of the skull with visible brain tissue falling out. This was consistent with a GSW to the front of the head. These wounds would have been impossible from where Oswald was said to have taken the shots and directly contradicts the Warren Commission's official report of a GSW entrance wound to the back of the skull. They also claimed the throat wound was an exit wound, disregarding multiple surgeons' testimony to the contrary. Now, JFK's body was then illegally taken at gunpoint from the hospital by government officials for an autopsy to be conducted under military control. This is not standard procedure. Under Texas state law, any homicide falls under the jurisdiction of the local medical examiner and law enforcement agency. Dr. Earl Rose, the Dallas County medical examiner, explained the situation to Secret Service, but the agents, with weapons exposed, shoved aside hospital staff to remove the president's body and ignored state law. Now, we've all seen the image of LBJ being sworn in on Air Force One with JFK's wife still in her blood-soaked outfit standing next to him. What you don't know is that JFK's body is also aboard that plane, illegally, and the swearing in is completely ceremonial. LBJ was already president, yet in a display of power and humiliation, he personally demanded Miss Kennedy to stand next to him for the photos while her husband's body laid in the rear compartment of the plane. If LBJ had knowledge of the conspiracy to kill JFK, which experts believe he did, this was simply done to send a message. Now, with the chain of evidence being broken by Secret Service, the autopsy was done at Bethesda Naval Hospital under military supervision and led by military intelligence officers. We know that this autopsy lied about the actual wounds inflicted on JFK to match the cover-up story, and all photos, x-rays, and brain tissue were lost after the procedure. Coincidence. That night, back in Washington, LBJ calls FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and on record tells him Oswald acted alone and that there's nothing to worry about regarding foreign involvement. This was done before any investigation had been conducted and was highly suspicious behavior. On November 24th, 1963, Jack Ruby kills Oswald on live TV. Ruby is a Dallas mob-connected nightclub owner with ties to CIA Mafia Cuban operatives. Within 4 days of JFK's death, LBJ reverses the order to withdraw from Vietnam with the goal towards mass escalation, and he abandons any nuclear inspection policy towards Israel. JFK's order for silver-backed currency through the Treasury is ignored, giving full control to the Federal Reserve. After the assassination, the CIA and the FBI are now left unchecked, and LBJ expands authority on covert operations and paramilitary war efforts while expanding their black budget autonomy. Now, LBJ's mistress, Madeline Brown, went on record saying, "Lyndon told me the night before the assassination, after tomorrow, those damn Kennedys will never embarrass me again." That's not a threat, it's a promise. Over the next few years, more than 100 witnesses linked to the assassination who were due to testify died under suspicious circumstances. This involved murder, suicide, unlikely accidents, and disappearances. The statistical analysis of this renders these outcomes impossible, and it highly points to an organized cover-up that a lone gunman could never have accomplished. JFK was attempting to fix a corrupt system and was a threat to Israel and major corrupt American institutions. With his assassination, all of the problems disappeared overnight, and the reforms to the CIA and other agencies have never been attempted again by a United States president. So we decided to come back and add this piece in. So what is the most likely scenario based on the evidence as to how JFK was killed? The CIA had a department called Executive Actions. These teams trained and executed political assassinations to include foreign presidents. Their SOP works something like this. CIA agents orchestrate the operation and line up the logistics. Then they bring in a trusted asset or multiple assets to pull the trigger. This way, if the shooter is compromised, the agency has full deniability. Now, according to FBI investigation reports, before the shooting, men in suits who were presenting themselves as Secret Service denied access to the grassy knoll area and parking lot. Civilians could see men in suits with rifles by the brush line facing the president. Shortly after, witnesses heard gunfire, and the men and apparent agents rushed off. Now, FBI investigators discovered that no Secret Service or security detail was posted to that area, which implies that some covert intelligence agents held the perimeter behind the grassy knoll, allowed their assets to take the shot that killed JFK, possibly had the driver slow down to allow the shots to happen, then evacuated their team. Multiple reports imply a mafia-connected hitman was one of the triggermen for the CIA. This has even more credibility when you also realize that Jack Rubenstein, Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald, also had deep ties to CIA-connected mafia assets. So, we've laid out all the facts. Who do you think killed JFK? A lone gunman who defied ballistic laws with his single bullet theory behind JFK, who, after his death, continued to perpetuate a cover-up that reached the height of the government all the way to the president and silencing witnesses? Or an intelligence agency with an unlimited black budget and global connections? I'll let you decide. If you still have any doubt about how far the government will go, a year before his death, the CIA proposed Operation Northwoods to JFK, which he shut down. This was a plan to stage false terrorist attacks in Miami, including bombing of civilian targets to kill civilians and blame it on Cuba to justify a war. The CIA and Joint Chiefs of Staff were prepared to mass murder American civilians to escalate a war. Now, some experts say a modified plan of Operation Northwoods was then created by the CIA to kill the president and blame Cuba to justify a war, which would also solve its problem of JFK trying to dismantle them. Now, after JFK's murder, RFK is ignored by the CIA and pulled off of the effort to reform them. In 1968, he enters the presidential race and had just won the California primary and was poised to secure the Democratic nomination and was favored to win the presidency. Now, RFK promised to reopen his brother's investigation and did not believe the Warren Commission. He also sought to finish his work of regulating the CIA. Now, RFK was the last serious threat that could expose the government's role in JFK's death. On June 5th, 1968, RFK is declared the winner of the California Democratic primary and gives a speech at the Ambassador Hotel. Now, he exits, and instead of leaving through the approved security exit route, he's guided by campaign staffer Fred Dutton through the kitchen. As he walks through a packed kitchen, 24-year-old Saran steps in front of RFK and opens fire with a .22 caliber revolver. RFK is hit 3 times. However, the autopsy report states RFK died from a gunshot wound behind the right ear, less than 1.5 inches away, due to the powder burns on his head. Saran could not have killed RFK, yet the official government narrative says he did. His revolver held 8 rounds. He was immediately pinned down after opening fire, yet 13 rounds were recovered from the scene. Now, several witnesses saw another man with a gun drawn behind RFK. These descriptions matched a Eugene Caesar, a private security guard who was directly behind JFK at the time of the shooting. He was armed with a .38 revolver and had deep anti-Kennedy political views. Now, Caesar initially denied ever drawing his weapon, but under interrogation changed his story multiple times and admitted to having his weapon out behind Kennedy before the shooting even happened. He then sold his gun days after the assassination, and it was never recovered. Now, who is this guy? Eugene Caesar was hired for just the night by Ace Security, a company with connections to Lockheed and intelligence contractors with the CIA. Witnesses then reported men in suits and security gear who were not LAPD or a part of RFK's detail standing in key positions in the kitchen, and at least 2 of them started moving the body and manipulating evidence before LAPD arrived. The LAPD then, under state guidance, burned all evidence in 1969, stating the case was solved and no further investigation was needed. No charges were ever filed against Eugene Caesar, and he was never subpoenaed by the Warren Commission or later investigations, despite witnesses placing him in position to deliver the fatal shot. Now, RFK Jr., the current Secretary of Health and Human Services, has publicly stated, "Saran did not kill my father. The evidence is overwhelming." Yet he is still in prison and listed as the one who killed RFK. So who benefited from JFK and RFK's death? The CIA, military-industrial complex, Israel, the Federal Reserve, and worldwide central banking interests. The American government will never release all of the JFK files, no matter how much time passes, because it will prove that the United States government and its agencies killed John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy.